as of last week, Anthropic, the AI company, has an open role posted online I saw, and it's for an influencer marketing manager. So what's interesting is the job description says the person would have to activate brand campaigns, do influencer activations, build ambassador relationships, essentially deepen that company's cultural presence. So when I saw that, I think a lot of people would wonder, why would an AI company who's saying LLMs are gonna displace white collar jobs through automation also be hiring humans whose job is to build deeper relationships with other humans? It's essentially because these hyperscale AI platforms are in a phase that I call the catfish phase, and that's what the rest of this series is gonna explore. So as a reminder, if you're just joining, I've created a multi-part series where I'm exploring how marketers, AI platforms, and consumers are all hedging towards humanity right now, but they're all doing it for very different reasons and motivations. So last time we just teed up the premise. We talked about how we're in the messy middle. We talked about how we don't know if AI is a friend or a foe. And I made a really bad metaphor about us being like cavemen standing at the edge of the woods, hearing noises. So if you think about AI disruption, it feels like everybody's leaning on their humanity right now, whether that's real or projected, because we're trying to figure out our way through this and where artificiality is welcome in our lives. So, as a marketer, my job is to understand people. And I see this hedging towards what makes us human happening on the three sides that I mentioned, across people, brands / marketers, and these AI companies. So for people are just trying to understand what is still uniquely ours as human. What do we still have control and domain over? 2, brands are trying to adopt tools without commoditizing themselves. So they're saying humanity still matters as far as our workforce and our products. AI platforms, they need to basically communicate in a human way so that we adopt this technology and invite it into our lives. In this multi-part series, as part 1, I'm gonna start with the most contradictory group of them all. And of course, that's the platforms building this technology, the AI platforms. So for these guys, celebrating humanity is a strategic means to an end. And in some ways, I do think we're kind of getting catfished, all of us. Before I get into the AI companies and what they're doing, I don't blame them. It's just an observation. Being a diabolical catfish, it's not like a unique thing or a new thing, because what I'm talking about is appealing to people's emotions as a stepping stone to getting those very same people to potentially automate their own jobs. That sounds like an AI thing, but that's not new. If you think about Uber, their original positioning was all about putting the world in motion, seeing more movement as meaning and opportunity for people. It's a beautiful story and it wasn't untrue. But now if you fast forward, all that movement and all the data that they've created based on their success is basically backing them becoming a business that's building out the back end of all the automakers moving towards autonomous vehicles. So if you think about that example, the drivers who they wooed and the passengers who they've wooed, those drivers have become replaceable by automation, and the riders have just become training data. So, that wasn't part of the original pitch, but that's kind of where we are, and a lot of us saw that coming. So back to AI. A few years ago, the AI companies, they made a series of missteps in their public pitch. A lot of them went all in on positioning AI as almost a replacement for humanity. I guess they thought that drumming up this tech dreams and this functional hype was going to be enough to drive excitement and mass adoption. A lot of people did adopt ChatGPT in that moment. But if you think about it, there were ads with like Apple crushing tools of creativity. Google Gemini was writing these heartfelt letters on behalf of a dad. And some of that work and the way they positioned AI was met with a lot of blowback by people. Because at its core, that work was about replacing things that we see as fundamentally human. Back then, those companies were really saying the quiet part out loud and people's alarm bells are going off, rightfully so. Our suspicions, or those suspicions that arose, came up because we've seen this before. Like, we have been promised certain things by technology and by platforms and then realized we've given up something more human in exchange after the fact. Think about it. We bought into the promise of more connection at scale, like Facebook, but then we became less social. We bought into promises of more efficient path to love powered by algorithms, but then love became very transactional. We bought into the promise of more inspiration in our feeds, but now we're bombarded with influence. We bought into the promise of convenience in terms of the things we want to buy and have, We just became more addicted to consumption. I don't blame the technology for all that, but it has helped expedite and fuel this behavior. I mean, the AI platforms right now need to do two things at once. They got to sell enterprise on efficiency and lowering headcount, but they need to sell everyday consumers on adopting the technology and giving it a lot of information. So those two things, those two goals are somewhat diametrically opposed to one another. But so now we're seeing in the current day that these big AI players have gotten smart about their brands, and they're hawking a much more humanized positioning about these tools and kind of their promise. So they've revamped their dating profiles for us so we're not so easily catfished, I guess. But ironically, to create this emotion, to be more human, drive adoption, they've hired external agencies and internal creative departments to do what they do best, create brand campaigns that influence people's perception. So like, if you look at what their current pitch is, Google is building on the equity they already have, the trust they have with their other products, to say this is just another helpful tool to easily adopt. OpenAI is the newer kid in the block, is focused on its everyday empowerment, and you can create everyday magic. So it just shows the utility of that product. They drive the usage, and they're showing it in as many parts of our lives as possible, saying, what can you do with this? And then Claude, slightly different positioning. They're telling us there's never been a better time to have a human problem that needs solving. And they're encouraging us and people to just keep thinking. So that feels super human. And it feels like we're not being replaced, but we're being augmented in some ways. So I guess it's somewhat validating to know that even in 2026, for all the advances in superintelligence, that, you know, marketing still needs to use intimacy to sell people on a product that's all about automation. These big companies need to use brands and agencies, but like, make no doubt about it, these companies are all in on their tech, even if that might seem contradictory, that they're hiring agencies and they're communicating in traditional brand ways, because none of these companies are going to win just on having the best model or feature, and they all know that. Brand and emotional connection is still a tried and true thing that's going to help someone choose an Anthropic over a ChatGPT and ultimately build that habit and drive preference for one service versus another. So they got to use that playbook. I mean, these platforms know that the way they position their product, the perception that they have of their brand with people and out in culture, it really relies on just the general populace having some level of connection, some sort of affinity that's more emotional than it is rational. I mean, if you think about it, that approach is a lot better of a sales pitch than asking people to literally come train on this thing that might take your job, but it can allow you to do cool things in your everyday, like create a grocery list. I mean, that's not that compelling of a sales pitch. You got to come at people from an emotional angle. So, you know, when Anthropic sees an increase in users because it takes this really public stance on AI and defense and like protecting humanity from the ills of war, or like when it puts out ads mocking ChatGPT for putting ads in their chat, you know, that's them just taking a bet on humanity and what's going to get people to relate to them on that level. But they're still trying to get to the same end result as OpenAI, of course. So they're just trying to have their brand sit in a special space in people's minds in order to win users. So like, you know, if I look at that playbook, I get why they have to take this catfishing approach, like sell me with the intimacy so that I can then automate my life. It's like more times than not, if I think about my own career, I have been the guy or a guy in those rooms whose job is to help turn a complicated story of functional tech that does some really cool stuff into a really clear story that you feel, a really clear emotional story where the benefit is beyond just what the spec of the thing does or the sort of obvious thing. So like, that's the magic of what a lot of us do in these rooms as marketers. So, you know, that's brand narrative, brand storytelling at its best. And yeah, I pride myself on how a bunch of humans can get together and bust their ass to find these counterintuitive insights or find a spark of an idea that can totally reframe what a product and what it does means to people. It's part of what we all love about this, those of us that do work in the field. But, you know, stepping back and looking at the sort of AI companies and how they're positioning themselves and their products, it does feel like we are again at risk of being wooed into buying into a promise where, you know, we as the people on the other side of that may not have a starring role in how it all really plays out over time. Back to the Uber example. I mean, Uber hedged human and aspirational for quite some time. And, you know, they gave us the sense that we were going to have our own personal valets and we could go anywhere. I mean, remember when it was only black cars, felt super luck. I mean, but now in hindsight, back then, they never really talked about what was going to happen to all the valets that were driving those personal valets for us. So I think, if you map that example to where we are with the AI companies right now, yeah, the AI companies clearly need humans to adopt and train their product and to build habit around their product before those tools can manage themselves and do more of those jobs. But we see it coming. It's obvious, right? So taking this back to what we do as marketers, we're in this weird moment where agencies and copywriters and creatives all using the same expertise that we built up for years to help build trust in these products that are also promising to augment or replace that very same expertise. Just this like really twisted loop that we're in. And I don't know a way out of it, but it's kind of where we are. I do think AI is going to drive a flattening like no other technology has ever before. When you think about creative talent, it's going to like quickly drive a commoditization of that. And that talent took an industry and individuals a lot of time to build and evolve, and it's going to be compressed and commoditized faster than any of us are probably acknowledging for ourselves right now. The more I reflect on this and I think about it, I've tried to challenge my own assumptions about this sort of, are we being catfished and are we in the Uber era of these companies? That sounds like a slightly cynical approach, so I've tried to challenge it. And on the other side of that, I've kind of wondered, maybe that Uber comparison is off, it's unfair, right? Maybe these tools and how they advance, they're no different from a Canva or a Photoshop. For those of us who are in creative industries, they're just tools that are available to everybody, but truly only mastered by a few people. So what that does is it leaves room for a whole range of humans to still be anywhere from mediocre to average with or without those tools. Maybe these things just settle into the background and you still have the same spectrum of talent and some people on the far end of it that are really good at using this technology to create new things. And on the note of creating new things, maybe the tools are going to usher in a new creative renaissance. Like people will use these tools in inventive ways to push edges that they couldn't before. And ironically, if they do that, maybe the AI platforms themselves will need to pay a premium for those real people and their talent and how they can use it in conjunction with these tools as a way of even differentiating that AI company from another AI company, right? So if the models all even out, the AI companies need to differentiate themselves and their brands. Are they going to use the same tools that everybody else is using to do their marketing, or are they going to find the humans that know how to use those tools in a unique way? So this strategy of lean human, it's not a contradiction for AI companies. I don't believe it's permanent. It's just a phase that we're in. But I think the question for all of us that's worth sitting with is this phase that we're in going to end the way we think it will? Or maybe if you think back to like very recent history, the Apple spot of crushing tools of creativity that I brought up earlier, maybe there's always going to be some things that humans will never be comfortable completely handing over. And we'll find some way to live in symbiosis, marketing symbiosis. So when all is said and done, it may actually be the AI platforms who end up catfishing themselves. Because if they successfully flatten everything to average, somehow that's going to inadvertently drive up the demand for original thinking and these irreplaceable human talents that might get supercharged by some of these tools, but you still need the human. So like if that happens, these platforms themselves are going to need those kind of skills to differentiate themselves from their very own competition in this sort of AI sort of space race. So like this just an interesting kind of thought that I've been sitting with in the implication for the platforms. But right now, those platforms, they're counting on human emotion to kind of like sell us at scale, and they're hedging human publicly, but they're taking a bet privately on obviously their own technology. So if AI companies are using human emotion to sell automation, on the other side of that, there is an emerging crop of brands who aren't even in the AI space, who are doubling down on humanity, and they're taking a public stance against automation just to humanize their own brand. So that's the next part of the messy middle that I want to explore and think about in much the same way as I've thought about the platforms. So up next, I want to talk about brands and how they're, and marketers and how they're hedging human.